Good morning, everyone. Welcome to AP European History. My name is Todd Beach. I'm a teacher at Eastview High School in Apple Valley, Minnesota. It's a large suburban high school that's in the south suburbs of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And I teach AP European History. I've been teaching for a long time. Excited to teach with you today, to learn with you today. And this is Katie.
Hi, good morning. I'm Katie Lancey. I teach at Coral Gables Senior High. It's in Miami, Florida. We're on spring break right now, but maybe some of my students are here. I have 230 amazing kids, and I miss you guys a lot. And today we're going to go through contextualizing pretty much the global problems in the 20th century.
All right.
So, before we get started, I want to talk about what we're going to cover today, but I also want to talk about why we're covering what we're covering. So I want to discuss the fact that we're starting on something that's not going to be on the exam and why we're doing that. Obviously, next Friday, we're going to have a clearer picture of what form the exam will take, given this unprecedented situation that we're all in. And colleges are supporting giving credit to whatever form the exam takes. We're going to know that on April 3rd. But they also are having an understanding that we're going to cover the rest of the content in the course. So we are going to move forward in units 8 and 9, and then we're going to return for review. So I know my own students are going to be going on to either AP US history or a contemporary history course. So finishing the 20th century is really important for sequencing, particularly if you're moving to a higher level college course if you're a senior. So for today, our learning objective is to contextualize the developments of the 20th century. We're going to start by talking about what contextualization means. We know that everybody's in a different place with different background. So we're going to try to bring some structure to what we're going to be doing for the next few weeks. For that, Todd is going to discuss GeoSprite, which is a structure for organizing information and looking at things from different lenses. Then we're also going to talk about the main powers leading up to World War I. We're going to talk about what's going on with Germany, what's going on with Russia, France, Great Britain, and Austria-Hungary. And then we're going to end with kind of talking about what questions in AP Euro demand depending on the task words. So Todd is going to walk you through an understanding of that.
Okay, great. Let's start with a warm-up. So in the description and the YouTube video, if you look there where you can click at the bottom of that where it says show more. And if you do that, you'll see there are two links to two pieces of text that we're going to be working on today. And so I'm going to give you a minute because I'd like you to open both those links. And the first one that we're going to work on is the source I have listed up there is Barbara Tuchman. It's from her book, The Guns of August. And now we're going to do this kind of as a read aloud, and that's why I want the text in front of you. So if you'd have that up in front of you, that would be great. We originally had it up here on the screen, but then we were told that because of some copyright issues or restrictions, we can't necessarily print that up on our screen. So this is our workaround for now. So if you have the Tuchman text in front of you, that would be great. And I invite you to kind of follow along as we do this read aloud and as our warm up today. Ever since 1892, when France and Russia had joined in military alliance, it was clear that 4 of the 5 signatories of the Belgian Treaty would be automatically engaged, 2 against 2, in the war for which Schlieffen had to plan. Europe was a heap of swords piled as delicately as jackstraws. One could not be pulled out without moving the others. Under the terms of the Austro-German alliance, Germany was obliged to support Austria in any conflict with Russia. Under the terms of the alliance between France and Russia, both parties were obliged to move against Germany if either became involved in a defensive war with Germany. These arrangements made it inevitable that in any war in which she engaged, Germany would have to fight on 2 fronts against both Russia and France. Okay, and so today, the skill that we're going to be developing as we go through this presentation is going to be contextualization. It's going to be really clear. We're going to be super explicit about that. So if you were to have this passage in front of you, here's a think for you. If you were to given this prompt A, explain one factor that led to the historical development described in the passage. Take a moment, think, and if you have something to write with, here or right on, this would be a good chance to just jot down how would I respond? What would my first ideas be about one factor that led to the historical development described in the passage from Barbara Tuchman? I'll give you a moment. And if we were in the classroom with my students, this would be the place where they would say, okay, let's turn and talk. Let's share our thinking right here. And so because this is a different format, one of the factors that you may have been talking about or thinking about would have been that system of alliances. The Bismarckian system of alliances could be a factor, and you would describe those. Perhaps your understanding of this history is a little deeper, and you know that Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm, had a chance to renew a non-aggression pact with Russia that he did not renew. And so that could be another thing that you would use to explain something that led to this the factor that led to the historical development described in this passage. Okay, so contextualization is our thing today. We can go to the next slide, Katie. And we're going to be talking about that. So it's skill number 4 of the historical thinking skills, contextualization, analyze the context of historical events, developments, or processes. And so when you think about this, when you're reading something, you begin by reading and you access this new information. And as you do that, your head starts to already draw on what you already know, and it starts to construct and make meaning. Sometimes you'll read something and you're like, oh, that's different than what I thought it was. And that's a misconception. And now you're reconstructing that misconception and making meaning. So we talk about historical context. That's a really good skill to start building knowledge. And so skills 4A and 4B about describing historical context, and B, explaining historical context. Those are the skills that we're going to be really explicit about today as we go through this learning. Can we go to the next slide? So because we're being explicit, we want to give you some structures. And your teachers have probably already given you some of these structures. PERSIA is an acronym that a lot of teachers use, which is great. And we want to encourage you to continue using the structures your teacher has taught you. But we also know that we have an audience that Katie and I don't know. And so we wanted to have some type of a structure going forward. So if we say, hey, let's geosprite this, or let's use Persia on this, that we have a kind of common language about what that means. So as you read something and you're getting information, we can use this acronym geosprite. We can think about it geographically, socially, politically, religiously, intellectually, technologically, or economically. So we want you to start organizing and classifying, because as you're learning new information, if you can do this kind of sort, it's really helpful, because then when you're asked later to respond, you can go back through that Rolodex in your head and do this sort in reverse order. What do I know about the geographical situation of Russia that may play on this historical development? Okay, so we're going to situate our learning that way. All right.
All right, so we're going to start going through the major powers leading up to World War I with the obvious Germany. And we can't possibly cover everything in a short lesson that was the impact of everything that's happening at the end of the 19th century. But geographically, we can't talk about anything other than really this newly unified Germany in 1871. After waging 3 wars, Bismarck's been successful in unifying Prussia with 25 smaller states into this powerful German empire. Prussia is going to take the lead here politically, and in many ways, it has over 2/3 of the population. And of course, its geographic border with France is going to be really important as we move into the 20th century. Socially, Germany, as well as other countries, began pretty intense social welfare programs in the second half of the 19th century. We're going to see in Germany that Bismarck is going to introduce Social Security, old age pensions, retirement benefits, and national sickness insurance. So we see these state-sponsored social welfare programs beginning. Politically, we have independent legislatures in all of these different states, but we really have a strong national government with Prussia at its lead. And of course, a strong chancellor in Bismarck until he's dismissed in 1890. And the king of Prussia, Wilhelm I, will become the emperor, the Kaiser of the empire. Religion does play a role for Germany after unification. We're going to see Germany being of a combination of Prussian Protestants, and then we have Protestant and Southern Catholic states that have been unified. Germany is going to, Bismarck is going to attempt sort of an attack on the Catholic Church. His struggle for culture. And while that's going to be ultimately unsuccessful, he will later on go ahead and woo a alliance with the Catholic Party. And then German Jews also play an important role, and they're going to make significant intellectual contributions and also provoke anti-Semitism. And Todd is going to talk a little bit more about that. As far as intellectuals, I just mentioned, we're going to see a really huge emphasis on education. Elementary and secondary schools will be expanded. They'll be open to all classes, and these secondary schools are both higher education as well as technical education, which is going to be really important. We're going to see an overlap of intellectual, technological, economic, different lenses here. We'll also see new ideas in physics and philosophy, the work of people like Planck and Einstein and Nietzsche. We're going to see all of that kind of come to the forefront. And technologically, Germany becomes this incredible industrial powerhouse. We're going to see a large infrastructure of railroads. We're going to see telephone networks built. And that's all going to have economic ramifications, as they're going to have massive growth, huge increases in steel and iron production, even surpassing Great Britain, which is a huge deal, and tariffs put in place initially to protect those German manufacturers. So Germany enters into the 20th century very powerfully. And with the dismissal of Bismarck, we'll see some changes there.
Okay, thanks, Katie. So now we're going to look at that other piece of source material. Again, if you're kind of joining late, in the description for the YouTube video, if you can do the click show more, there's going to be 2 links in there. And so please open both those links. We've already read the excerpt from Barbara Tuchman, but we want to begin with some context of Russia. And the source I want to do is this source from Adam Hochschild. And it's from his book, To End All Wars, A Story of Loyalty and Rebellion, 1914 to 1918. This particular excerpt is regarding Russian readiness for war. So again, please have that out in front of you, and we'll do a quick read aloud of that. This is a longer excerpt, so for the sake of time, I'm just going to do the first paragraph and the final paragraph, and we'll start now. Unfortunately for the Allies, though Russia's army was the largest on earth, it was also one of the most inept. There were, for example, a little more than half as many rifles available as soldiers who needed them, a matter to which no one seemed to have given much thought. The army had only 1 battery of anti-aircraft guns, which were protecting the Tsar's summer palace. Many Russian generals were elderly and overweight. The nerves of 1 corps commander proved incapable of withstanding the sound of rifle fire. Into the last paragraph. Russia was a peasant country, and roughly 1/3 of its millions of conscripts were illiterate. Unfamiliar with modern technology and in need of cooking fuel, soldiers sometimes chopped down telegraph poles for firewood. Exasperated commanders then resorted to the radio, but as code books had not been properly distributed, the Germans could simply listen in. In these early days, Russian soldiers tended to fire on any airplane, including their own. Not having seen one before, they assumed such an exotic invention must be German. So with those pieces of context that Hochschild has provided for us, think, how does this excerpt help you contextualize Russia's readiness for war? And again, if we were in the classroom setting, this would be a good chance to turn and talk, share their thinking with that. Okay. All right, next slide. So Russia, again, very explicit today with contextualization and geosprite. So with Russia, it's the largest country on Earth still today. It spans 11 time zones. So to give you some context of that, the contiguous United States spans 4. Socially, at the turn of the century, Russia's social classes are experiencing changes. They're moving from an agrarian to an industrial economy, although this is a slow move. Serfdom officially was emancipated in 1861. And unlike a lot of Western European countries, women do play significant roles in agricultural life, working side by side with men. Politically, it's the Romanov family in rule. They've ruled Russia for over 300 years. You should also understand that Russia, because it's such a vast empire, is also multi-ethnic. The Duma is a parliament. It was kind of comprised after the revolutions of 1905, and it is popularly elected, but they don't have much influence on the Tsar at this time. In fact, that's part of the frustration and the tension that's building up in Russia at this time. Religiously, the vast majority of the subjects follow Christian Eastern Orthodox or Russian Orthodox practices. Again, because it's such a multi-ethnic empire, there will be Muslims and Buddhists, and Jews do experience anti-Semitism through a series of pogroms that begin in the 1880s. Next slide, please. Intellectually, Russians are not formally educated, but there is a growing middle class that is, and it's becoming a lot more intellectual. Dissidents such as Vladimir Lenin are becoming a lot more vocal about the old regime as Marxist ideas become attractive to workers, not just in Russia, but all over Europe at this time. And technologically, they're behind, but in 1892, the minister that is appointed is Sergei Vitae, and he uses the West to catch up with the West, is this phrase that he likes to use. He's inviting Western industrialists and capitalists into the country to try and quickly modernize Russia's backward economy. So economically, they are a very agrarian economy. They don't have a lot of industry yet, and which places them behind other European powers. But with Vitae, they move the country to the gold standard to try and strengthen Russia's finances. And I guess the best way to put it, the country at this time is resource rich, but kind of technology poor, and doing their best to quickly catch up. And you can imagine what a task that is in a country as vast and large as Russia. Next slide.
All right, thanks, Todd. So we wanted to give you a couple different activities with visuals. And I know that in Unit 7, if your teachers already covered it, you would have covered new imperialism and its global effects that would create tensions that would strain alliances and lead to World War I. And tomorrow we're going to talk about causation in World War I. And of course, we can't do that without talking about the alliances. But I really like this particular political cartoon. And what I think students need to be able to do is to step back. It says Bismarck slicing up the magnificent African cake in 1884, 1885. So students need to be able to explain the historical situation and then think about what the viewpoint is of the point of view of this cartoon is. So if you were going to write something about the historical situation, we would hope that you would be coming up with broadly the scramble for Africa, that Europeans control just over 10% of Africa prior to 1880, and by the turn of the 20th century, we're up to 90%. That quote, magnificent African cake, is actually used by Leopold II of Belgium, whose personal ambitions are going to lead to the actual specific context, which is the Berlin Conference in 1884-85. And so here we have Otto von Bismarck, the honest broker of the conference, and he's the one wielding the knife that's going to divide up African territory. He's in control of the meeting. It's a meeting where we have only white Europeans attending this meeting to decide the fate of Africa. And so while Germany's imperial interests are somewhat limited at this point, that's going to change later, and we'll be speaking about that more tomorrow. But I also want to keep in mind that this is a French cartoon. And so the French perspective of the power of Germany, particularly post-unification and post the Franco-Prussian War, which Todd's going to speak about in a minute, is important to consider when we're looking at visuals. So I really like this cartoon, and cartoons frequently do show up on the AP exam, and so it's something that students need to be well-versed in dealing with. Todd?
Okay, thanks, Katie.
Yeah.
Here's another image as we kind of, again, contextualize France and the state of France as we get ready to talk about the First World War tomorrow. So this is a particular painting, and it's titled The Proclamation of the German Empire, January 1871. It's done by Anton von Werner, and I got the source from Wikipedia, but take a look at this particular painting, see what you notice. And again, our prompt is explain the historical situation and point of view represented in the painting. So as we break down this painting, this is proclaiming the German Empire, 1871. It is after Germany wins the Franco-Prussian War. And what you don't know by this, but Anton von Werner did a series of these paintings, and I think this is the third in the series. And if you were to look at the series of the paintings, they become more and more overtly positive for Germany. The first image was kind of a photograph, and part of it, we have to look at this setting. So they're signing this peace agreement that ends the Franco-Prussian War. The Germans have overwhelmingly won, but they choose, of all places, to have the peace agreement signed in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. So one of France's most hallowed places, most important places, and emblems of power, Germany is going to say, no, we're going to have you come here to your palace and we'll sign the peace agreement here. And there you see on the left then is the German emperor, and up on the dais. And then to the right, you're seeing these German soldiers with swords raised and hats raised in the air. In the middle, in white, symbolically, is Bismarck, who's brokered the whole deal. So, I mean, it's very much, if I were thinking about the historical situation and the point of view, it's certainly from a German point of view, von Werner being a German artist, projecting this particular image inside the Treaty of Versailles. Or not the Treaty of Versailles, but the Palace of Versailles. France, so we'll do again a geosprite of France. Geographically, they have what's important to know as we get into World War I tomorrow is that they have a series of fortifications along the border with Germany. There are French colonial holdings in Africa in the late 1800s that result in minor disputes with European powers. We'll talk tomorrow about the Moroccan crisis, that is a minor dispute which gets bigger. Socially, after 1871, the French government creates free compulsory elementary schooling for boys and girls, leading to more secular Republican education. Politically, after the defeat of the Franco-Prussian War, France will now declare its third republic, and they restore kind of republicanism. But socialism is on the rise in France as it is throughout Europe at this time. Religiously, you probably already are very aware that the majority of French citizens are Catholic, although there's an event called the Dreyfus Affair that creates a lot of distrust because Captain Alfred Dreyfus is a captain in the French army. He's Jewish, and he is falsely accused of some actions. He's stripped of his rank and sent to prison. And it comes out later, the realist writer Emile Zola and others do these investigations. And it comes out later that these were all trumped up charges against him, an effort by the Catholic Church, a very anti-Semitic effort. So this incident creates a lot of distrust between the church and state. And then as a result, Catholic schools lose about a third of their students to the state's secular schools. So we see this shift going from rather conservative, Catholic held institutions of power to distrust to more secular. Next slide, please. Intellectually, people of France are very well educated. There are two big movements that are happening place at this point: the literary movement, artistic movement, realist, impressionist movements, post-impressionist movements, also known as an expressionist movement, are taking place during this time. Technologically, France is industrialized at a bit of a slower pace than Great Britain and Germany, but their industry is a bit more mixed. They still have these artisan industries and luxury goods. Also, something really interesting, at least I found it really interesting, the French military is going to purchase designs from the Wright brothers for airplanes, as did the Germans, as did the Italians. And we will soon learn, if you don't already know, that airplanes in World War I are the first time that is used as a weapon. Economically, France's economy is strong, has a mix of agriculture, industry, luxury goods. There is commercial competition, but not at the same scale that the commercial competition is taking place between Great Britain and Germany at this time.
Nice. All right, so speaking of Great Britain, the largest empire in the world at this time, with the famous "the sun never sets" on the British Empire. Great Britain has holdings all over the world, strategic territory in South Africa, Egypt, India. So it's the largest empire in the world. Socially, like other countries, there's very, very deep reform going on. We have bills that have extended the vote to almost all adult males. And by the beginning of the 20th century, we'll have seen Parliament, like you just mentioned in France, we have free compulsory education for all children, as well as welfare reforms such as old age pensions. We also have a very strong women's suffrage movement with Pankhurst and her Women's Social and Political Union organizing to promote the vote for women as well as the vote for men. Politically, there's a picture there of Queen Victoria. She reigns from 1837 to 1901, but Britain is a parliamentary democracy with two competing mass political parties. We have the Conservatives and the Liberals, and you would have covered those in a previous unit, and we'll move on. So religiously, predominantly Anglican in Great Britain, although there will be religious problems still between Catholics and Protestants here. with the parts of Catholic Ireland that are demanding home rule. This gets particularly intense after the famines in the middle of the 19th century, and they would actually implement home rule just after World War I. Intellectually, I think it's really important to talk about some of the intellectual ideologies that come out of the end of the 19th century, because they're going to have a lot to do with what we're going to talk about tomorrow and the beginnings of World War I. We're going to see Herbert Spencer, the British sociologist, who takes Darwin's ideas and applies them to society and the inequities of class and race struggle and in the survival of the fittest and social Darwinism. And we're going to see Rudyard Kipling's poem come out at the end of the century that will be sort of grabbed by nationalists who that idea of a civilizing mission appeals to them as they go forward and do a lot of the imperialism during that time period. Kipling is writing to the United States about their territories in the Philippines, but it certainly applies to all the European powers that are having imperialism in Asia and Africa. Technologically, we do see the huge importance to Great Britain of the things that allow imperialism to make the world smaller. The steam power and as well as the telegraph is going to be what allows Great Britain to communicate with its vast Asian and African colonies. And then we'll also see the use of the Maxim gun, which is a British invention, and it's widely used in their conflicts with their colonies. Economically, although Germany is rivaling them, we do see that in the second half of the 19th century, Britain is still the largest trader of raw materials. It's the largest producer of agricultural products and finished goods. It's still an economic powerhouse. And it'll be sort of this competition for economic superiority that's going to help push us into some of the causation tomorrow. All right, Todd.
Thanks, Katie. Okay, continue with Geosprite and Austria-Hungary. Take a look at this map. So this is the ethnic groups of Austria-Hungary in 1910. And so if you were given this particular image on an exam and asked as a piece of stimulus, for example, and the prompt said to explain the significance of the historical situation represented in the map, as you think about how you're going to connect that to causes tomorrow of World War I. So as you can see in the map, it is a multi-ethnic empire, but it is an empire held under the domain of Franz Joseph II. So he is trying to keep all this together at a time when nationalism, this need to seek identity, is on the rise throughout Europe, really kind of globally. And so here you see all these different ethnicities striving for identity and nationhood, but they are kind of wrapped under this one empire. And that is going to be part of the tension then. If you talk about the significance of the historical situation, you'd be talking about tensions and these ethnic tensions, and you'd be talking about need for identity with rising nationalism. So again, we're being, I know, really explicit about Geosprite today. Tomorrow is going to look a little bit different, but as we're kind of creating context today for World War I, which we'll talk about tomorrow. So here we have this image of Austria-Hungary. This is the image actually is of the German-Austria-Hungarian alliance, because that's Kaiser Wilhelm on the left and Franz Joseph on the right. So geographically, the dual monarchy of Austria and Hungary is formed after the Austro-Prussian War, 1867. As we've been talking about, it's a multi-ethnic empire. Socially, I mentioned rising nationalism, latter part of the 19th century, creates a much greater tension in the region. Politically, this empire is ruled by the long-standing House of Habsburg. There are some local government controls, but the government, it really functions along monarchical models. And then, as we keep saying, the multi-ethnic tensions and this desire for identity are significant at this time. And it's pretty good that, I guess, if you're a nationalist, that Franz Joseph can keep this empire together as best he can. Religiously, while the majority of people in the empire were Catholic, there are Protestant Jews, Muslims, Eastern Orthodox faiths with significant populations in this multi-ethnic empire. So, you know, the House of Habsburg is very Catholic, but there are all these other religious populations that also tied with this need for identity. Next slide. Intellectually, Interestingly, free schooling existed throughout the empire, and they would teach in the child's native language, but there are great disparities economically throughout the empire. There are a lot of intellectual contributions that come through music, literature, and art, many of those through the cities of Vienna, Prague, and Krakow. And technologically, the empire is highly industrialized, especially in Austria and Bohemia, in the areas around Budapest. Um, and it's going to be the second industrial revolution. I'm moving down to economically. The second industrial revolution really helps to accelerate the already strong economy with significant increases in the eastern part of the empire, which was poorer at the turn of the century, but we see them doing much better as we lead up to World War I. Okay. We're going to move to this. As you're thinking about the exam, on the exam, whatever shape or form that we learn about on April 3rd, one thing you do need to have an understanding are task words. And these task words are structured from accessible or entry level to more complex. So if you understand what the task word is and what the demand of that task is, then your chances of eliciting a response that gets at what they're looking for much better. So the entry level task word is to identify or describe. In European history, we see the word describe used a lot. So, and this is the most accessible task. And if we ask for a student to describe something, we just want you to tell us about it. Give us a narrative response. Describe the events that led to World War I. Just tell us about it, okay? The next task word then would be to analyze or explain. And then as we've written up here, this is a more challenging task because we want a deeper, more connected response. So you would tell us about something, but then you also need to tell us the how, why, or because. So what were the events that led to World War I? This happened, this happened, this happened, and this is important because. And you should also include an example. So the how, why, because, and an example. So describe, then to explain is more challenging. The third task word you'll see a lot, and you'll see this primarily with long essay questions or document-based questions. And that task word is to evaluate. When we use this task word, it requires the writers to, first of all, have a preponderance of evidence that they can think about. I have to know some history before I can evaluate. So they'll phrase the prompt with the word evaluate, and they'll want you to take a position. So it could be this or this, and you're looking at the evidence or thinking about the evidence, but we want you to choose a side, take a position, and then use the evidence that you have to strengthen your position, to substantiate your position. So it also then requires these explanations and examples. So you're going to take the position, you're going to discuss the how, why, and because, and you're also going to include an example. Okay.
Okay, so really quickly, some key takeaways from today. You can certainly use GeoSprite to create structure. Perhaps you've already spent the whole year with a different acronym. I know Todd mentioned Persia. I think most teachers kind of give some structure for learning material and thinking about material from different lenses. And so we just wanted to start off with a very explicit way that you can do that, both for what we're going to cover moving forward, and then to remind you, we are absolutely going to go back and do reviews of content from the beginning of the course through Unit 7 that's going to be included on the exam. Be able to contextualize the characteristics of these powers, the 5 main countries we mentioned, to talk about causation for tomorrow, which is what we're going to cover is World War I. Develop your historical thinking skills. We're going to give you practice. I feel a little bad that we're going to give, quote, homework during these lessons, but perhaps your teachers can use it since they're probably giving you work already. I know we're all on learning online at this point. And then we will go over at the beginning of the lesson whatever question we gave. And I promise as we find out the structure of the exam a week from Friday, we will be gauging our practice towards whatever information we find out. And also, as Todd just said, whatever questions we have on this test, since we know they're going to be free response, they are going to have task words. So understanding what the question demands is really quite important. So for that, we're going to leave you with a short answer question for today. I'm going to go over it and we'll talk about the answer as we start our lesson tomorrow. As you are looking at the different tasks, I want you to consider what historical information do you need to address each part of this short answer question. The SAQ is sort of the least complicated. but it is a fact-based answer. So you want to make sure that you're including historical information. And then what is the level of the task word? And short answer questions often move from describe in one part to explanation in a later part. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to describe one factor contributing to tension between European powers at the end of the 20th century, in the early 20th century. And of course, we're looking at tension because we're thinking about that causation for the global problems we're going to have, starting with World War I. For B, you're going to explain one similarity of the domestic concerns within Russia and the Austria-Hungarian empires in the early 20th century. And then for C, explain one difference in the foreign policies of Germany and Great Britain in the same time period, the early 20th century. So start to look back at what you may have already covered and think about how you would answer that. And Todd and I will go over the answers that we could hopefully expect for you to have tomorrow.
Okay, everybody. We hope you found this really helpful. Thanks for watching. Hope you and your family are well. I miss seeing my students and being with my students. I'm sure your teachers are feeling the same. But stay healthy, practice those things of social distancing, flatten the curve, all that.
Wash your hands.
Yes, wash your hands.
So much, you have no idea.
Yeah. I also want to Katie and I want to thank College Board. There have been a lot of people since these new restrictions came in place who have worked really, really hard to set all this up, and they're doing the very best they can under these very hard circumstances.
And I promise we are going to review. That's coming very soon. Yeah.
We will be reviewing as well. But thank you, College Board, for helping get this set up. We appreciate it very much. And we look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow. See you, Katie.
Take care.